Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Camber Karting podcast. It's been a while. We miss you guys. It has been a wonderful, wonderful holiday season. I say that, I could be lying. I don't know. But it's been great. So, after this little break in things, we are going to get going again here. And we got some great plans for 2021. Welcome to the new year. We are in the first week or two of it. Not starting off all that great in some aspects, but we're going to make it better because we have racing, the Camber Karting podcast, the only place where you literally pay nothing for useless dribble. So, here today, we have an important thing to talk about. And that is, well, first of all, I guess, let me turn it over with a quick PSA from the man, Chris.
Hey guys. So, you know that I love going fast, just like the rest of us, right? But from time to time, we need to slow down and realize that sometimes the most dangerous part is how quickly we slow down and what happens to our brains while we're slowing down. That's right, we're going to be talking about safety because I think we don't want to go too far in this podcast before we fully address that. And considering some of the incidents that went on at the end of last season and something that went on in my own life recently, um, yeah, we think that it's just we need to do our part by addressing it and hopefully dropping some knowledge on y'all. So buckle up tightly. All right, Cory, back to you.
All right. So, as Chris said, we're going to talk this week about safety. It is a major player, I guess. It's probably one of the most talked about things in motorsports nowadays. And unfortunately, safety's talked about in motorsports for probably all the wrong reasons. When safety fails, or when we have a lack of safety or perceived safety, if you will. So, because of recent events in the last decade and recent events in the last month or two, we thought it was important to bring this up. And spearheading this, literally and figuratively, that was really badly worded, but
Shame on you.
shame on me, was the incident this last month at was it the second to last Formula One race?
I believe so. It might have been two before. I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah, I think it was the second to last Formula One race or two before, where we had the most horrific motorsports accident in some time, in quite a while. I would have to say it was really terrifying to watch live, and that was the accident of Romain Grosjean and his Haas spearheading through the guardrail and catching fire really violently. And luckily, thank whatever deity you believe in or whatever your belief is, thank them that he made it out alive and really relatively unharmed with some burns on his hands. This accident, you know, at any point in time, I think before the innovation that we're about to talk about here in a little bit, the Halo, would have been a sport-changing incident, first of all, majorly, but also would have ended his life. And if this would have taken place back in I would say the 80s or the 70s, it would have, or any time before that, it would have definitely been one of those major turning points, and we would not be talking about Romain Grosjean being here alive today. He's not here with us in the studio, obviously, because we're not famous enough to get him, and we also don't have enough money, but he is, so to speak, with us here today. So, as we are, always, we have myself, Cory, we have Chris, and we also have Andrew, us three experts in I say experts, but experts in the karting and motorsports world. So let's talk about safety and how Romain Grosjean's incident spurred this on, and particularly the Halo. We got some hot takes on that, Andrew?
Oh, yeah, totally. But I got a PSA of my own, first of all. Folks, when you're out on the track, you got to send it. You got to send it hard, but you got to send it safely. Know when
Hashtag,
and when not to send. The end.
hashtag
Oh.
send it safely.
Yes.
I guess my PSA would be, you gotta know when to send it. So when you send it, remember to lick the stamp and freaking send it, but have the address written down properly, or else you're
Yes.
gonna go where you don't belong.
Don't send it to yourself.
Yeah. So, hashtag lick the stamp and send it. Daniel Ricciardo, that one's for you. So, anyway, Andrew, getting back to the hot takes on the Halo, we'll start off with you. Your thoughts on that, man?
Well, I mean, I think I'm not the first person to say that the Halo isn't exactly the prettiest thing in the world. But damn, it's effective. You know, it's already saved multiple people's lives. And I don't think you can make any reasonable argument to get rid of it at all, especially after Rowan's incident. You just can't. You know, it's here to stay, and it should be.
Yeah. It was. I don't know about you guys, but I got up to watch that race live, as I do with quite a few Formula One races, and I was sitting on my couch and I was just starting to think about getting a cup of coffee. Like I was like, okay, probably going to be kind of a sleeper of a race, like they normally are. And that incident, well, that was the first lap, and watching the cars stream out of there, I'm like, okay, this is kind of exciting. And then you see the car you just see something dart across the track, and then a massive fireball, and the camera cuts away, and I'm like, oh, well, shit. And my wife was watching for once, and that was like, what? And they, didn't come back in with the camera for, no, it's serious. And then when the camera focuses back in and you see the fire, it's like, oh my gosh. Yeah, it was wow. And just wow. So if you haven't seen it, obviously a quick description was Romain Grosjean's car at the start of the race darted across the track to the right, down a straightaway, and went through a guardrail. Not over, technically not under, through a guardrail, and split in two, and it caught the fuel cell and split it from the, I guess, the safety cell of the chassis. And in doing so, somehow fuel ignited, and it was a massive fireball. Romain was still in the car, and first of all, the fire is the number one concern at that point, because F1 fuel is 2 steps away from jet fuel practically. It is nothing like what you get in your car. Even though they may be sponsored by Shell or Esso or some company like that, it is nothing like what you get in your car. So it is highly flammable. And that's the first concern. But then seeing where the car is, it's like, then you start to think, okay, is the fire that big of a deal? Is the driver even with us anymore? And luckily enough, we seen the safety team pull up, the F1 doctors, and we managed to help get him out of the car in the middle of this blaze. And he was walking away, and it was one of those like, oh my gosh, that just happened. So I mean, that's crazy. And I remember texting. I think I texted you, Chris. I'm like, holy crap.
Yeah, that's your message is the first thing I saw when I woke up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I mean, honestly, there are moments like that where most accidents you see as experienced racing fans, most accidents you see, you're like, okay, someone might be hurt, but they're going to be okay. Rare is it for us to see an accident where we have that innate sense that a life might.
yeah.
And I, honestly, the fact that, going back to the Halo, before the fact that accidents like this, we're so lucky that we didn't have more accidents like this before the Halo. think about the Formula One World Championship was first like properly established in the late '50s, and we've had some, I'll say, decapitation. Thinking Francois Sever at Watkins Glen in the early '70s, uh,
Yeah.
or impacts like Jules Bianchi. But the fact that we went for so long without some sort of safety device like that and didn't have as many of those violent traumatic head injuries as we could have. And first of all, we got to thank our lucky stars for that, you know. But it really puts in stark relief, like, why did we wait so long? You know,
Yeah.
we've had computer, we've had CAD since in some form since the '80s, right? Why did we wait so long?
Yeah, it truly. I think it goes to show how controlled an atmosphere sports, professional motorsports at the top level are. Um, that we haven't had more, and I guess I'm not saying this to say that we should be patting ourselves on the back for that, but it should be noted of how good some of the top drivers are, some of the mechanics and the teams for putting this stuff together, that we don't have a much greater percentage of those accidents, um, compared to what it could be, say, if it was, I dare say this, like an amateur sport where you have very inexperienced people or people that don't have that um, kind of control over the vehicle or the technical knowledge, just a simple lack of knowledge. Um, but yeah, it is simply amazing that we haven't had more. And I guess that's why it sticks out, and why the accidents that we do have or have had in the past that have been unfortunate really do stick out. Like Sever um, was such a big deal uh, because they don't happen often. And it has been unfortunate that it's taken this long, but we do have this now. The Halo, as much of a thong as it is, or a flip flop, I if I was in that car, I would not want to drive it without that flip flop over my head.
Yep, absolutely.
I mean, obviously, I think the reason we see a much bigger focus on safety, especially recently, is because we see motorsports in a different way than we did in like the 70s and 80s. Back then, I think a lot of people just accepted that motorsports is inherently dangerous, and that risking your life is just a part of it. And maybe there's a little bit of, oh, I'm a macho man, I'm doing something super dangerous for a living, look at me. I mean, maybe there's a little bit of that too, but I think mainly it's just, you know, we saw motorsports as an unsafe thing, you know.
Yeah, I think that's because life. I don't want to be the guy that says, "Oh, well, life was so much more dangerous back then." Like, life's still dangerous now, but like life was dangerous then, in that if you think about when, even in the late '60s, right, the one of the golden eras of Formula One, most of the people racing in Formula One lived through, or at least were born, you know, during or right after the Second World War, right? And that whole, it's mostly a European sport, and that whole continent was ravaged. So I think for at least the first generation of F1 drivers in the late '50s, but definitely their offspring or the people that they mentor, the have being able to just risk your life racing versus dodging bombs was like such a stark difference that it almost it pale it the danger paled in comparison in the popular mindset. Of course, as we get further away from that, and we live less troubled lives in with regarding, at least in Europe and America, regarding large scale conflict. I think that that we have the luxury of saying, oh, well, this is dangerous and that's dangerous, and like, let's stay away from that. You know? I think just their context was completely.
Yeah. And I think it wasn't just Europe. I think overall, and we can call it this, a lot of the baby boom that happened post World War II, a lot of the GIs coming back, they had seen it all, and a lot of the soldiers in Europe, they had seen so much, and to them, death in motorsports was, like you said, it was nothing compared to what they'd seen. You know, they were willing to risk it, put their lives on the line to have a good time, and really, for better or for worse, I think that's where a lot of motorsports really evolved from and really started to get popular. And because of I'm going to say the non-safety factor of it versus playing cricket or here baseball or there football, here soccer, kind of things. Um, um, yeah, it's just that non-safety factor was so much more alluring than sitting around on a Sunday watching those sports or playing those sports. Um, and it sold. It sold. I mean, obviously, motorsports is one of the largest sponsorship vehicles, so to speak, both literally and figuratively, largest sponsorship vehicles of all time. And back in the late 60s, early 70s, when sponsors really started getting involved in the sport, obviously people were watching this on TV when they could. They're going to the races, and that danger sold. And if you look at like the brands, for instance, that were sponsoring, they were okay with being associated with that danger and the fear of death, or I guess not fear of death. The tobacco companies, alcohol, even the dirty magazines. So, and obviously any number of car part companies. So it's definitely a product. I think obviously all motorsports have been around since before World War II, but I think motorsports as we know them today and the popularity and where a lot of the danger was accepted was a product of post-war hormones, I guess. We'll call it post-war syndrome or hormones. And really, when safety started being taken more seriously, I would have to say the turning point in F1 was Sir Jackie Stewart.
Yep.
And that was in the late 60s, early 70s, and through the 70s, and he really spearheaded the safety efforts. And we're talking 30 years removed from World War II at that point. So he was probably one of the first people to look at this and say, okay, I love doing what I do, but do we really need to kill 2 of us each year?
Right. And I think he says that what got him, besides that statistic, was being half unconscious upside down in a tree with fuel pouring all over.
Yeah.
Which is just, if you to picture it, I don't care what era you're from, that is an absolutely mortifying image. And
Yeah,
it's a come to Jesus moment. And it certainly was
back
for
then it
him.
was avgas. Oof.
Oof.
Yeah,
Some
they used
nasty stuff,
avgas in
man.
cars. So, yeah, he was really the proponent of that and started moving things forward, and really before they did anything with the cars necessarily, any big campaigns, I think it was the barriers, which ironically was the Armco barriers, the same thing that Grosjean spearheaded through.
Yep.
Were the state-of-the-art barrier at the time at the tracks, because most of the time they would have hay bales or some fencing. And he insisted on getting, him and the drivers association insisted on getting Armcos put up, or they wouldn't race. And that was, really the start of something. And then through the years, we've seen development with the cars. We've seen them develop more. And really, I think the thing that is still behind the times, at least in Formula One, well, and to a certain point here, is the types, or I guess the tracks. Some of the tracks are still behind the times. Some of the tracks are really boring, really quote unquote safe. But the tracks that have the good racing for the most part are not considered modern safe tracks. So, and I think what was once a viable option for a wall, like the Armco barrier, is no. To be honest,
Minus Monaco. Monaco's
Minus-
horrible and unsafe.
yeah, Monaco is going to be that one thing that sticks out.
I mean, think about Watkins Glen, right? You know, that like we mentioned Sever. Those wall, I mean, not the actual, wall he hit, but like the type of wall and that design of barrier, it's like I can't even call it a wall, is still there at Watkins
It's the
Glen. Now,
Armco.
yeah. Now, yes, it's been supplemented by tire barriers, but as we've seen with so many Sprint Cup wrecks, you know, it it really only works if you're in a very durable closed cockpit vehicle, and even then it acts like a cam. Another type of wall, Pocono, they used to use boilerplate steel welded together, and when you hit that side on at 200 miles an hour, that will rip the side of your car open.
Yeah.
And so we moved away from that. We moved away from straight concrete. But it seems like Armco still, like, even at Sandown. I love Sandown Raceway in Australia. That I feel like that's the Darlington of the Southern Hemisphere. But there was a Formula 5000 race there last year, no, year before last, where someone hit an Armco on the backstretch, and it was a massive blowout of a wreck. And at what point can we keep justifying using Armco?
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's expensive to upgrade to something different, but we've risen to that occasion before,
Yeah.
And it doesn't have, and I think we start with start small, start in the most dangerous of corners, but that's a movement that at least needs to start.
I think Watkins Glen is still for the most part Armco through most of the back section of the track. And the really scary thing about Watkins Glen, if you're in a low sitting vehicle that is open cockpit, is you can see daylight underneath the barriers.
Yeah.
Going back to a story from my former employer, John. If you listen to this, John, I'm telling this story, so we'll pay rights. He drove Watkins Glen in a laydown enduro car back in the 70s or 80s. So he remembered, he talked about how, I think he did it once or twice maybe, and how scary it was. Because in a laydown enduro kart, you can't see anything except the walls. It's just this long blue tunnel, sky blue tunnel kind of thing. And it was one of those, there's no runoff. So you do not want to hit the wall because you can see daylight underneath that wall. And that means a really bad day. So,
yeah, man. The
I know in F1, the Baku City Street Circuit, if you look closely at some of the, obviously with street circuits, there's a lot of Armco, there's a lot of concrete because the concrete barriers are quick and easy to put in. And as much as I hate them, as much as anyone hates them, they're not going to rip apart like the Armco. But if you look at the Baku City Street Circuit with how fast it is, because that straightaway is so long, there are parts of that track coming through the high-speed corners that they actually have temporary safer barriers installed.
I mean, that's at least we know it's possible.
Yeah.
Temporary safer barriers, because I think that's where we need to go. It's not going to be perfect, but at least it's not going to split it's not going to split into pieces when you hit it.
It's the best thing we have right now, I think. When they first developed it, and if you look, something I was reading up on after that accident, like, why don't they have safer barriers? And I don't think there's any safer barriers around that is that Abu Dhabi they were at?
Yep.
Um, a lot of people were saying, well, you have to have a concrete wall behind it, and they don't like to do concrete. And it's a lot of upkeep there. But there's actually two variations of the safer barrier. You have the North American iteration that's on the super speedways, where you have a concrete wall that's the backing agent, so to speak, your traditional wall. And then there's one that is actually anchored to the ground through steel supports that is a more road course oriented or temporary type thing where you can pull it in and out more frequently rather than backing it to these solid concrete walls. And it works the same. So that is an option. And for those of you that aren't educated, we're talking about the safer barrier developed here in North America. Probably the one really good thing to come out of Tony George's reign at the Speedway. And it stands for Steel and Foam Energy Reduction, where you have these steel, basically these long steel pieces that are backed by foam. So when you hit them, they're hollow steel pieces. So when you hit them, it absorbs all your energy in the accident rather than just trying to deflect you back in the track or deflect that energy back at you. So they are a lot more viable option safety wise. And there's still a lot of tracks that are yet to adopt them. I think Pocono was one of those. They had quite a bit that wasn't safer barriered up.
Yeah, up until 2010, I know at least 2010, because that's when Elliott Sadler and Kurt Busch had that wreck where the engine ripped out of the car on the backstretch. They had those old, I call them Talladega style, like berms with Armco up against them
Oh yeah.
that allowed access to the interior road course and to the safety marshals.
Yeah.
And it was all grass. Yeah, that's where Steve Park flipped.
Yeah.
I think twice. So I think when Justin Wilson had his accident, I think that was one of the first years that Pocono had backstretch catch fencing and a paved apron on the backstretch with at least some sort of permanent wall. I can't remember if it was a safer barrier or not on the inside.
I think it is safer barrier, and it's much, much closer to the actual racing surface.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because before, if you went off, I mean, that was, knowing it's the Poconos, that was grass and mud at 200 miles an hour, and then steel guardrail, grass and mud, and hillside. You know,
You can gauge the severity of the hit by how much dirt gets flung up behind the Armco.
yeah.
Yeah.
Think Mark Barton's wreck at Talladega, or Rusty Wallace, or Davey Allison. There's a reason. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. Sorry.
So I was saying there's a reason why IndyCar had what was it, 89, 24-year hiatus where it didn't go to Pocono, right? Like the drivers, very rarely do you hear drivers straight, all of them straight up say, no, I'm not racing. That's more common in Formula One than it is in NASCAR or IndyCar. But after '89, like they said, no way, we're not racing here anymore until this stuff has changed, and it took a while,
And it's like MIS at one point, the whole backstretch wall was Armco.
Yep, because they
we're
still have the
talking
crossover gates.
Yeah, they had the crossover gates. Yeah, and we're talking Michigan International Speedway, one of the fastest circuits, no matter what series in America. When you're on the oval, it's over 200 miles an hour.
Oh yeah.
And having Armco as the only barrier on the outside of the backstretch is not a good thing. It has been fixed since then. It is concrete now. I don't know if it's. I don't think it is a safer barrier all the way down the backstretch. They have safer barrier definitely in the corners, on the insides and outside, but it is no longer Armco down the backstretch. I can attest to that.
Yeah. Even until the '90s, it didn't have catch fence on the backstretch at Michigan.
Oh
Because
yeah,
you
that's
see
right.
you see pictures from the Michigan 500, they'd have a camera for the Indy cars. They'd have a camera right up on the backstretch wall as they come off turn two, and there'd be a flower box, a nice shrub, an open air, and a concrete wall.
Don't you just love the flower boxes they have at like the
I,
500 and places like that? Like
I,
what?
it's so nice. Like I gotta hand it to them. It is a nice touch, and it feels like a throwback. But I
Yeah,
don't want to see it up close in a race car.
yeah. Huh, that reminds me too much of the street races and karting. And when you get a up close in a kart, it's not a good day.
No.
To kind of deviate off of it, when we talk about dangerous race circuits, I probably two of the most dangerous things you can do in a kart are two of the there's two road race tracks. Is it Lake Afton and like Lake Garnet or something out in Kansas, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
They're basically, I think they're racetracks, but they're through these like state parks, and there's literally no walls. There's nothing. It's just these roads that go through these parks. So they put up hay bales, and there's trees right next to the track, and you go over like a stone bridge, paved obviously, but there's cobblestone sides. You drive through a campground or whatever, and you're doing it at like 100 miles an hour. Um, I mean, and they still do this. This is definitely a throwback, and I salute the guys who do this. Is it for me? Probably not.
I mean that really is 60s F1 level stuff.
Yeah.
I
And
mean,
then we go to the street courses, like with the SIRA, Southern Indiana Racing Association, and I Race Goodland Grand Prix was one of the big ones, and then like Anderson Mayor's Cup. And when you see street courses on TV with like IndyCar or F1, you've got walls, catch fences, and the streets are completely shut down, and you've got very specific areas for the fans. And then the first time I ran Goodland Grand Prix, actually, first I went to see it the first year they had it, but I ran it the second year they ran it, and you've got hay bales in the corners. And then there's just people standing right behind the hay bales, like, hi. And there's
hey,
mailboxes and flower boxes,
and fire hydrants.
fire hydrants, and they've got the steps up to the sidewalks because they had the big raised sidewalks down in downtown because it's old school Indiana town. It was just, you know, you like I did that and I love that race, but that was the one time I really, really questioned my sanity. Like, really, really, telephone poles. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Hey, well, but before we get too far, I got one more thing about Armco,
Hmm.
and then we can keep talking about karting incidents. Rick Mears, Sonera Speedway in Quebec, 1984,
Oh yeah.
hit the Armco on the front stretch, guarding the pits, and
Hmm.
just about ripped his feet off.
Yep. If you want to hear the story about that, I encourage you to watch. It's not Yellow, Yellow, Yellow. It's
It's rapid response.
Rapid. Yeah. I believe it's a book also, but Rapid Response. It's on. I think it's on Amazon Prime right now.
Yeah,
That's where I watched it, and it's not exactly for the faint of heart because it talks about all the really pivotal IndyCar accidents and everything that's kind of come from them. And it's the story of Dr. Steve Olvey and later on Dr. Terry Trammell, the two main IndyCar docs. And it is an amazing documentary. It is a great story. So I encourage you to watch that, and they go into detail accident and the amazing. I mean, today it's pretty standard response, but the amazing response that Dr. Olvey had and whatnot, and getting him back into a car eventually. So, but yeah, that goes over his story there. But yeah, the Armco, almost really. basically started the beginning of the end of the career for one of the greatest IndyCar drivers of all time. So, yeah, the ARM code, not a good solution. Hopefully, moving forward, we can get away from that. I'd love to see these tracks with safer barriers. But really, the key to this was the halo, which, for all intents and purposes, a halo is a roll cage. It is a 3-point roll cage that is super strong, intended for these open wheel, open cockpit cars like F1. And now it's been adopted to basically every type of open cockpit car that has a major racing series in the world, including IndyCar.
With the aero screen.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the aero screen's actually stronger than the halo.
Yeah. So I believe the makeup of the aero screen, because a lot of people are saying the aero screen is better than the halo. Yes and no. At its roots, the aero screen is a halo. If you look on the inside of it, the basis for it is in fact a slightly reconfigured halo. So they basically have the halo, but because of the high-speed nature of IndyCars, they've had to put that windscreen on there. This was all developed by, I believe, Red Bull technology.
Yeah, because I think they'd originally come up with that canopy, like the F-16.
Yeah. Yeah, they had the bubble canopy, and they tested it in Formula One, and the Formula One guys didn't like the idea of it. It had bugs, we'll just say that. And then they tested the canopy here, which was pretty darn cool looking, if you ask me, when Newgarden went out and tested it at the Speedway. That was pretty cool looking. But I think they went with the best choice of having a combination system of the arrows, the canopy, and the halo. And now we have the IndyCar aero screen, which has not as extremely proven itself as the F1 halo, but it has proven itself. And we're still, this was year one for it, right?
Yes,
aero screen?
2020.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm already so used to it now. I'm like, okay, whatever. But yeah, this was year one for it. So there's still some bugs. I guess the big thing is driver cooling. It is extremely hot in the car now.
That then drink bottle cooling, like even their fluids get hot because they in the straw, like they originally get hot because they're on like the leading edge. At least on the Schmidt-Peterson cars, they were like, I don't want to give the secret away, but they were somewhere down low, right? So like they're gonna get hot.
Yeah.
Cory, you might want to edit that out, but yeah, but like at least the part of the straw that was like the tube that was exposed would be cool, but now it doesn't because there's no airflow.
Yeah, I could see them wrapping them with that. Well, maybe they have. They wrapped them with that insulated material, the same thing we put on like our arms of our suits and stuff to keep us from getting burnt.
Yeah.
But yeah, we
Nomex.
have. Yeah. Well, I think it's not Nomex, but it might be Nomex back, but it's that silver material. It's like aluminized. That's what they call it.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
heat
it's the heat
reflective.
shield. Yeah, the heat
Yeah.
shields.
Which, by the way, in a little bit here in the podcast, not too long, we're going to get to karting safety. We'll get out of the big car stuff here in a minute. But yeah, that was adapted for IndyCar, and it's gonna stay. And I could see the halo starting to trickle down because Indy Lights currently doesn't have any.
I think they will. I know all of the new Formula 4, Formula 3, all of those junior Formula cars have it. Any chassis that's being produced brand new has it, right? So I think every Road to Indy car has it. I think Indy Lights was just before its implementation.
Okay.
I think within the next year or two they expect to have it or have the halo.
Yeah, they'll
I know
probably get the halo, but probably not the aero screen because I don't know what super speedways they're going to be running on.
Yeah, I know. Formula Super 5000, not Super Formula, but the Formula 5000 down in Australia. All of them. Those are Formula 3 tubs with massive
Hmm.
engines, and they've got the Halo.
Okay.
So I think just about every open cockpit, and we've already moved away from open cockpit prototypes. So I think
Yeah.
any open cockpit prototype, like in SCCA, I think all of those are grandfathered in at this point because there aren't
Yeah.
any new ones being produced except for like Spec Racer Ford. So I don't know what they're going to do.
It's funny how we're got in this roundabout way. Indy cars, for instance, here in North America, the top open wheel series would not run roll cages. There have been guys who come to the 500, at least one guy with a cage on his car. And it was so odd to see that. And then obviously, what the Divergent series, sprint cars are products of the original Roadsters and Indy cars. They went to roll cages, and their roll
Yeah,
cages really, in effect, haven't changed for decades.
right, and
Um,
that was a whole kerfuffle just getting that approved, and I mean
yeah,
approved by the drivers back in the '70s.
yeah,
And now there's still structural issues
yeah.
cages,
So
but
yeah, we've had that in sprint cars, and obviously stock cars. You have the cage. Um, but it's really interesting how everything kind of comes back around because I was watching, and credit where it's due, I believe it um, was it Slap Shoes on YouTube
yeah.
talking about the history of super modifieds.
Oh yes.
And super modifieds are derived from old Indy Roadsters. Those
Yep.
were
Oh,
they'd buy up the old Indy Roadsters and then they had to put a roll cage in them.
yep. That northeastern stuff.
Yeah,
If you want to think about what a front engined Indy car would look like, go look at a
yeah.
race from Oswego or a Stafford or one of those. You know.
Basically, if you want to see what IndyCar would be if Robin Miller was in charge of it, watch a super
Yeah.
modified race. um, that's pretty much sums up if Robin Miller was in charge of IndyCar Tech. Um,
Hey, they were some of the first ones to do active aero. They can adjust their top wing angle with a pedal.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
that's really cool.
Jim Hall would be proud.
Yeah, they had DRS before it was cool. So yeah, that's kind of interesting how IndyCar is getting these basically like a roll cage with a windscreen now. And the super modified guys who are basically a product of that, when IndyCar broke away from the front engines are just like, oh yeah, we've been doing that forever. Just get
Well,
over it.
actually, funny enough, I've seen pictures of some super modifieds that were made from rear-engined IndyCar.
Yep. I think in that video he talks about they actually had to ban them because they
Yeah,
were too good.
yeah, especially on dirt.
Yeah. But yeah, so it's kind of interesting seeing how we're getting into the. So moving forward, we've talked about walls, we talked about cages. Obviously, helmets have changed quite a bit in the racing world, and I guess the biggest, quickly touching on helmets, the biggest helmet change I would say, there's so many small things that they've done to make them better, but obviously materials, the implementation of carbon fiber. Um, the biggest thing in the last 20 years, I'd say, would probably be the anti-intrusion strips they put on the visors after Massa's incident.
Yeah, what's that? Xylon?
Xylon, yeah. Massa had an incident, I think it was back in 2009, where a spring came off a car and jumped up and hit him in the helmet, right at the top of the visor. And he very nearly, um, it could have killed him. It was really bad.
He almost died.
He almost died. He luckily came back from it, but that was the start of, okay, we needed to put some more protection on the front of the helmet at the top. So they came up with, really in the short term, and it's still used to this day by quite a few drivers, the anti-intrusion strip, which is Xylon, a piece that gets stuck to the top of your visor, and it basically is like this big visor strip, but it acts as this extra panel to protect you from stuff flying up right there. Um, and now the newest helmets, have that built in, so the visor is very, very small. The eye slit is very small, so that's already built into the helmet. So that's probably like the biggest, I think, advancement in helmets we've had is just eye port size going down and that strip being put in to protect drivers. And now, like with IndyCar, for instance, they still require that, but obviously the aero screen is taking most of that away from having the helmet to do that, or helmet needing to do that. F1 still has that possibility something could slip through because it's an open cage kind of thing. So that's really the big thing. Obviously, with driver gear, the biggest development, and it really hasn't changed much. I'm going to be terribly honest. The biggest development was Nomex. Because they used to use cotton suits soaked in borax for their flame resistance. So they've made small advancements here and there, and thinner materials. So driver suits now are great, and obviously shoes and gloves. In IndyCar and in F1, they now can take all your biometrics and stuff while you're running. They have, I know in IndyCar, in their earpieces, they have to have special little sensors in them, and they have sensors throughout the suit to check you real time, basically.
Yeah, and I think the earpieces have accelerometers
Yes.
that will basically read G-force, G-loading.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing is like it's been interesting to see like you talked about the kind of the eye box getting smaller. It started out some guys had what looked in the late 70s had what looked like medieval helmets with a very small eye box, and then they got wider, and then if you look at some of the early NASCAR closed helmets like Davey Allison's helmet or Mark Martin's helmet, you could
Simpson Voyager.
you could basically see their whole face through the visor.
Yeah.
Right. And now we've closed back down. But yeah, I think one thing that I noticed, I've got this old 1993 Olivier Griard Formula One helmet.
Oh, he's flexing on
Um,
us now.
I can't use it anymore because of an accident at my apartment. Andrew knows about this. But so it is now just in my closet. But that had very thin padding, I mean, not thin, but thin compared to what, a normal helmet, Bell helmets, which I have to plug for. It's thinner than a normal Bell or Zamp helmet pad. So that's been a big thing. I think the realization that it's not just your head hitting something, but your brain hitting the inside of your skull. That's the real thing to watch out for.
I guess the thing that I'm sorry, I almost missed this, but the biggest safety improvement overall in all of car racing, the Hans.
Absolutely.
The Hans device.
100%.
Yeah, it's and whatever version that you use it, whether it's the Hans device, the hybrid Pro device, there's a million. I feel like there's a million knockoffs of it now.
I looked it up. I looked it up. There's like I looked all of them up. I had like 15 tabs open on Google Chrome right before we recorded this.
But the Hans device and its ability to just, oh my gosh, the drivers that it saved, the accidents that it could have made such a difference in the past. Obviously, now here, if you're listening to this and you don't know what the Hans device is, which I'm guessing most of you that listen to this know what the Hans device is, but if you don't, Hans stands for what is it? Head and neck. Head
and neck safety system. Head and neck system. It's a head and neck restraint.
So it's basically it's like a horse collar that goes around your shoulders, and it's got a strap in the back of it because there's a big lip that comes out behind your helmet, and it basically hooks on or bolts onto your helmet on each side. And it will allow you, now they allow you to turn your head side to side, when they first came out, it was stationary. You couldn't turn your head side to side. And what it does is the belts go down over it, the horse collar on your neck or on your shoulders. And when you hit a wall, they were finding that one of the worst things that could happen to you that has claimed the lives of many drivers, the late great Dale Earnhardt, was a basilar skull fracture. And that is where your head goes far, when you hit the wall really quickly and your head goes really quickly forward and your spine doesn't catch up with it, kind of thing, and you fracture the bottom of your skull. And it's really unfortunate, and it's one of those where the accidents don't even look that bad. Doesn't even need to take a real high-speed accident to do that. When your body is in place and your head is not being held in place. And the Hans device helps your head stay in place, deceleration. It helps stabilize all that, keeps you from going all the way forward and snapping things. And it has probably been the single greatest safety invention in motorsports. I'm besides the helmet, obviously, but I would say that of modern times, it's the single greatest safety invention. And it's spawned numerous knockoffs and different versions. I know the hybrid is an interesting device because it straps onto your body and doesn't require seat belts necessarily in the typical position. So if you have a 3-point belt in a regular car or something, you can still be relatively safe with that, versus the Hans takes 2 shoulder belts. So it is one of the greatest, if not the greatest, innovations, and has saved so many drivers' lives now. So going forward, how does this relate? What can we talk about with karting, guys? What are the big things that we can take away for karting and safety innovations?
Well, first of all, foot injuries.
Ooh,
Um,
that's something we don't think about much.
yeah. If you look at, here's something. So, go-karts, especially vintage karts, have a lot in common with old school prototypes and Indy cars, in that when you hit something, you're going in feet first.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
there's no crush zone.
right. So anyone who's ever driven an old school kart or a Grand Prix kart and hit a hay bale or a wall knows what we're talking about. It's one of those pull your feet back before you go in situations. And I think that the advent of just plastic bumpers, the status symbol they've become, what aerodynamic benefit they give, how the rules are enforced. I'm not here to comment on that. But what I will say is that just having something between your feet and whatever you're going to hit, because I've had times where I've gotten an accident, I've hit the brakes, I've pushed the brake far enough, I've actually ended up kicking the cart that I was about to run in.
Yeah.
And it hurts, right? Just the advent of having something crushable between, well, I think has been one of the biggest advancements in karting safety.
Yeah, the body work is definitely, as a crush zone, a very effective tool, I believe. I think they've done a great job with that, at least on the asphalt side. On the dirt side, I think there's a little bit to catch up with because they're still using a lot of single panel fiberglass stuff. It's much of a crush zone as more as keep dirt off you and get through the air. Andrew, what would you say safety wise for karting?
Well, in karting, you're not exactly strapped into the cart, right? So in that way, it's a lot like a motorcycle. When you get in a wreck, you're supposed to fly out of the cart so you're not carrying, or so that the mass of the cart is not throwing you around. Because you're probably going to flip if you crash a cart, most likely. So I think the biggest thing that helps with those kind of accidents is the anti-abrasion fabric that karting specific suits use. I believe it's some kind of nylon, right?
It is Cordura by DuPont. The story, the basic story is it was developed as a not bulletproof fabric, but something in the same vein as that. It was developed for that industry, and then it got adapted to what we use. Yeah, the Cordura fabric, the nylon, and that's been a big deal. And suits, I was actually writing notes down for this last night on suits and everything in karting, and it is a really fickle, interesting industry, ladies and gentlemen. The karting industry, the karting world, with their attitude towards safety is really interesting, especially in the suit side. Because for instance, if you go to a normal asphalt race, almost everyone has a full suit. I'm one of those that don't always wear a full suit, so shame on me. But you wear a full suit. Normally, anything that's currently made is normally up to some standard. Even if it's a knockoff, it's made out of a pretty high standard of nylon material. I admittedly am not greatest with that because I come from the dirt world, and in the dirt world, 99% of the racers at the track wear just a jacket, and it's kind of poo-pooed on to wear a suit. At least it was. Nowadays, I don't know as much. It's been 10 years or so. But yeah, the suit is, and the abrasion resistance from it is a big deal. Having been upside down a couple times, 3 times maybe, on some famous asphalt, yeah. Luckily did not get any scars from that. Yeah, it's absolutely a big deal considering where karting started, where you had guys going out in t-shirts and blue jeans or painter's pants. Definitely a step up from that. And to that extent, also the old school karting suits and jackets made from leather are really, really, really good. The ones made by companies like Bates, things like that, they do motorcycle leather, are probably some of the best that you're going to get. Because leather, while it doesn't breathe, is obviously probably has some of the greatest abrasion resistance. So I would definitely agree with you on that.
Oh, speaking of crashes and famous corners, you want to tell everyone what happened at PRI after that one?
Oh, which story is this? Oh dear, it's been a while. Remind me.
So, when you went to the Zamp booth at PRI,
Was it Zamp or was it?
whichever
well, no,
helmet you had.
I had a Pyrotect at the time, which I will stand behind. Pyrotect is a lesser known brand, but they're a spin-off of Bell, and I will stand behind their product because I personally put it through the crash test. Yeah, I went to, after I had my crash at a rather famous speedway that may have the initials IMS in it.
It looks slightly rectangular.
Slightly rectangular. Might have been running races there for over 100 years.
Diamond ground surface, you know.
Diamond ground surface is really hard on helmets, by the way. I had a crash at a certain kart race there and ended up on my head directly and skidding across the track on my head and my shoulder. And it's funny, that was the first race I just got my helmet painted. It was my first semi-professional paint job. And first race out, totaled my helmet. So I came down on it pretty hard, and I was luckily no head injuries, no neck injuries, no concussion, anything like that. I was very, very fortunate with that. But I went to the I think it was the Pyrotech booth. Yeah, and I went to thank them, like, hey guys, I know you, like, it was like one of those, like, I know you're not the big players in the industry, but your helmet protected me, so I wanted to say thank you. And it was like, what? Do you still have the helmet? Oh, maybe. I don't know. I might have thrown it away. I'm not sure. I have to go check. Can you ship it back to us? We need to study it. And the customer service was great with them. Unfortunately, the helmet did end up going away. Not to them. It ended up in the garbage at some point. Because it was just too painful to look at for me. But yeah, it was just the people at the booth kind of flipped out. And I explained the situation like, "Yo, my gosh." So yeah, that was a fun one. And now currently on Zamp, and Zamp has great customer service too. I guess my karting innovation would be neck protectors, or we'd say head and neck restraints, but it doesn't restrain you. But basically things that the neck braces. So
EVS.
yeah, so a few years ago, getting close to the end here with this, a few years ago, there was some kind of safety summit that happened, and I think it was, if I remember reading it correctly, it wasn't long after Dan Weldon's passing, that there was a lot of ripple effect through the motorsports industry of looking at safety standards, because when one big thing happens and you lose somebody of that caliber, everyone kind of step back, kind of tends to step back and say, okay, what can we do better? And there was some safety summit, and I think it involved some of the IndyCar docs like Dr. Steve Olvey. And there was a little article that came out that they did a study ever so briefly on karts and karting safety. And they were able to take some samples and do some sled test with a kart. And that's something that really doesn't happen in the karting world. And they compared neck braces. Because if you're in North America, you know that, or at least the United States, you know that no matter where you go, it requires you to wear a collar of some sort. And most of the time, everyone's wearing those foam neck collars that have been around since like the 80s. And they did this study comparing a foam neck collar, one of the new motocross style collars that were just coming out, and then nothing at all. So just no neck collar at all. And they actually found, first of all, the motocross style collar, like the EVS or the Leat brace or something along those lines, that adapted or now made for karting, pardon, no pun intended here, head and shoulders above the rest, safety wise. They actually said it was almost better to not have a foam collar than to have a foam collar, because in the case of an accident, when you come down and your helmet starts to compress, you start to compress the foam down on one side because it almost always rocks over, and you'll start to actually compress that foam down too far, and at some point you start to hyperextend the other side of your neck because you have compression, too much compression in that foam. So they said that actually can lead to more injuries that are, injuries specifically related to that. And they said it was really 50-50 between not having a neck collar and having a foam collar. But they said absolutely the motocross style collars, if you can use them, use them. I can also attest to that. They work very well. Because most of the time they are of some hard material, whether it be plastic or fiberglass or carbon fiber, and then they have padding underneath. So it's basically the karting or motocross equipment, but instead of having to keep your head from going too far forward, it helps you with compression if you land on your head. So it keeps, basically, once your helmet comes down, it locks into place on the collar, and you don't move with your head. And it transfers that energy to your body rather than, which you can still obviously get injuries from that. They said the most common would be a collarbone, breaking a collarbone, because if it's a hard enough accident, you're transferring that energy from your head and your neck down to your point that it's first hitting is your collarbone. But that's a heck of a lot better than, breaking your neck. So that would be my my hat in the ring there on greatest safety innovations in karting. So, anything else from you guys this week on that?
I think I'm all out of takes. Oh, wait. No, I'm not.
Oh.
One more thing about walls. Why are some walls put at the angles that they're at?
Ooh, it's a good question.
Like Watkins Glen is a prime example of this. Like coming out of the carousel at Watkins Glen, there is a wall on the left side of the track that marks basically like the end of the runoff area where you can like go to the boot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And there's tires there. But that wall's basically angled such that if you hit it, you're gonna bounce onto the track, right into traffic.
I wonder if it's because there might be something behind that wall that they just can't shift that entire line back to be flush with the first part.
Could be. I think it was probably the with a lot of those older, a lot of it, or even with the newer ones, it's what landscape-wise you have to work with, and what the geography is. So if I remember correctly, don't they have hills on the inside of the corners there?
Yeah. It's
Uh,
yeah.
Hills
There's
and
definitely
valleys.
topography.
Yeah, the topography really factors into it, so you can only go so far back before you're into the hill. So that may be part of it. Or they just put that wall there thinking, okay, let's just keep the cars in. Because I don't
I'm
think that
looking at
track
it.
was sorry.
I'm looking at it right now, and it looks like um, if you moved that wall back, like so, we first at that runoff where they like to drop two wheels over on exit from the carousel, right? If you take that line and then take the almost parallel line that's formed after it jinks inward a little bit, if you made all that flush with the original line at the beginning of that runoff area, if you slid along that, you'd slide right into corner exit from the boot. So that might be part of it, but also there's trees back there, and
Okay.
I think that they were just trying to like keep it as far from the tree as possible. Because it jinks back towards the track, right where there's a tree. Um, I don't know. That might have something to do with it. Like I think it's a combination of landscaping and just making sure that if someone overshoots the transition to the boot and hits that barrier, that they don't go flying along it into cars that are exiting the boot.
Okay. Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to just keeping cars in the track and then with the top, especially on those tracks like that. Herman Tilke did not design that one, so so that's pretty much, I think, about everything we've got for this week, especially safety innovations and whatnot. Um, I know we've missed stuff. I know there's a lot of stuff. There's too much to go over that we couldn't possibly do it in the amount of time that we want to do it, um, especially in karting world. So we will be back hopefully sooner rather than later. We're still discussing what our next episodes are going to be, but we have a really good idea of what we're and how things are going to be a lot more fun in 2021. Fun in 2021. I like that.
Bars.
But hopefully you'll be keeping up with us here on the podcast, off Camber Karting. And don't forget, go over and take a video or take a gander on YouTube, just off Camber Karting. We've got some vlogs going up on there. We're going to be working on some vlogs hopefully soon, to go back up on there. So maybe some real world stuff. I don't know. We might have to see where that takes us. And hopefully get some track time in at some point. I know this last year I had absolutely horrible track time given the current circumstances. I went racing once. So, hopefully we'll be able to get some more content out there to you, and whatever, have a good day, have a much better time, and let's have a better year. Let's make things better, and let's go racing. We need to go racing. We need some racing. So, as always, remember to keep on and keep it on all four. Please, please keep it on all four. And thanks for listening. See you later.
Yeah.